Welcome to the Ironwood Gym. Today we're going to take a dive into programming with chains. And in all reality, programming when it comes to chains does not have to be that complicated. But there are a few things that you should be aware of when you're putting chains into your program. And we're going to take a look at it from the perspective of max effort work or heavy work. We're going to look at it when you're training by percent. And we're also going to look at it through if you're training using dynamic effort work or dynamic effort training. But before we get into any of that, we need to look at some of the practical considerations, and that's really how much your chain weighs. Now, this right here is a 5/8 inch chain, okay, meaning that each length is 5/8 of an inch in diameter. So for 5/8 inch chain, 5 foot long, at least the chains that I have, are 18 pounds a piece. Okay, but anytime you're putting them on a bar for a squat, bench, or deadlift, you're going to be using 2 of them. So when I'm referring to a set of chains or a pair of chains or how many chains I'm putting on the bar, I'm only talking about one side when I use that number, but you have to understand that it's adding double that essentially. So my 5/8 inch chain is 18 pounds. And every time I put one on the bar, I'm essentially adding 36 pounds to the bar, one chain per side. For me, and you don't have to do this, but for me, when I'm looking at it, I always have chain on the floor. Whether it's just a few links, depending upon how I've got things set up, whether it's just a few links or more. So when I'm putting it into my numbers, I always cut it down to 33 pounds. I just do that right off the bat, figuring that there's going to be some chain that is going to be unaccounted for laying on the floor. Now, I also have these gold chains, and these chains are 1/2 inch chains. My 1/2 inch chains weigh 13 pounds a piece, meaning that I'm adding 26 pounds to the bar every time I add one, and I cut that down the same as I do the 5/8. I just take 3 pounds off and I add 23 pounds every time, or I figure that I add 23 pounds to the bar every time I add a chain. So those are the practical considerations you should be looking at. Now you can use, I like to have in the 5/8 inch and the 1/2 inch both because it gives me some more options. So if I have someone that's not as strong, maybe their max on bench is only 150 pounds. Well, adding 5/8 inch chain to the bar for them is a lot. So having a 1/2 inch chain allows them still to work with chains, still to accommodate the resistance, and gives them something that they can work with. For also in myself, so if I'm training my bench, maybe I don't want to jump up 66 pounds or 33 pounds to the next chain and go 66 pounds. I can cut that down a little bit, throw one of my gold chains on there, my 1/2 inch chain, and only add 23 pounds instead of the full 33. So it just gives me some more options. And if you wanted more than that, I believe Titan Strength Systems or Titan Strength sells 3/4 inch chain, so that would give you some more options. As far as where I get this, because most companies don't sell 1/2 inch chain, at least not at 5 foot lengths. I went to Amazon, looked up 1/2 inch toe chain and bought it there. It actually saved me about $5 a foot from the local hardware store, which when you're adding, I bought 6 chains or 6. I bought enough for 3 pairs and then I cut it down. So by going through Amazon, it actually saved me quite a bit of money going that way. So those are some of the practical things that you need to be aware of. Next, we're going to look at strength work or heavy max effort work. All right, when it comes to max effort work or heavy strength work with chains, it's really important not to get caught up in the actual weight that you have when you're lifting. All right, the weight on the bar is fine, but don't get caught up in how much chain weight you have. It's okay to know it, but in the end, it doesn't really mean a whole lot. The easiest way to go about this is just to count the number of chains. So if you have 300 pounds on the bar and you're using 2 chains and you set a record with 300 or 305, don't worry about how much weight those 2 chains add to the bar. Just know that you did 305 with 2 chains. That's all you need to know. Don't get caught up in all the little details, because in the end it doesn't really mean anything. 305 with 2 chains, which would be 65, let's say it's 65 pounds of chain weight, doesn't mean you're going to bench 365. Okay? It doesn't mean you're going to lift that much more. In fact, a lot of people probably won't lift that much more. So just know how many chains you have on the bar and go by that when you're setting your records and you're keeping track of it. Now, how many chains should you have based on your strength level? Again, it doesn't really matter. Now, there is a caveat to that. So first, you can use as many chains as you want. And one of my favorite workouts, I only did it a few times, but one of my favorite workouts was max effort work, where I would squat up to 315 with straight weight only. And then I'd put a chain on the bar and do that. And then I'd put another chain on the bar and do that. And I just add a chain every set. Ended up doing a whole lot of sets. But once, I think I got up to like 7 chains per side with 315, which was a fantastic workout. Really stimulates the nervous system, generates a lot of rate of force, a very high rate of force development to do that. But it's just that workout, okay? Now, if you're using a lot of chain all the time, then you are going to end up getting stronger in the top and weaker, or not as strong in the bottom. You're going to have this major deficit between the bottom and the top. So if you're a geared lifter, that might be okay, but if you're a raw lifter, you really need to have some balance in there. You need to be training with straight weight as well. Probably a good portion of your training with straight weight, but don't be afraid to put a lot of chain weight on there every once in a while. You can train with just a few chains, or you can train with a lot of chains, but you want to keep it to where it's not all the time you're using a whole lot of chains. But don't be afraid to put a bunch of chains on there every once in a while. But there's no set recommendation, okay? So that's kind of the caveat. If you train with a lot of chains all the time, you could develop a strength imbalance between bottom and top. But as long as you're training a lot with straight weight, you're going to be fine. So don't get too worried about using too much chain, as long as you're not doing it too often. All right, if you're training by percentage, okay, or by percent, then it does start to get a little bit more complicated. But I'm going to try to keep this as simple as possible. So there's 2 basic ways if you're training by percent. Let's say you're benching with 2 chains and you want to be at 70% for the day. Okay, so number 1 is you can know your max. You utilize an actual 1 rep max of your bench with 2 chains. Not going off your bench press. You're going to go off what you can do for your 1 rep max from your bench press with 2 chains on the bar. Okay, that is one way. And then you just take your percentage straight from that. And that can be an actual 1 rep max, or it can be an estimated 1 rep max based off of feel or a certain number of reps you did previously. It doesn't really matter how you get it, but you're going to utilize that max and calculate the percent directly from that. So, quick example, if your max with chains is 200 pounds and you want to be at 70%, don't worry about the chains, just put 140 pounds on the bar and you're good to go. But remember, we're calculating that from your max with the chains, not from your actual bench press max. Okay. The second way is probably a little bit more practical, and we're going to utilize the percentage at the top of the lift. So in this case, you need to know how much weight, or approximately how much weight you have in chains on the bar. So if you're going to be at, if you want to be at 70%, okay, and your bench press, your chains that you have on the bar, the total weight of the chains adds up to 20%, then we know you're going to subtract that from the 70, okay? Subtract your 20% from the 70, and that'll give you 50% of the actual bar weight that you have. So a quick breakdown of that. Let's say, again, we'll go back to the 200-pound max. If your actual bench press max, okay, is what we're going to use. The actual bench press max is 200 pounds. And you're going to utilize, let's say your chain weight comes up to 40 pounds. That means your chain is 20%, okay? Because 40 pounds of the 200 is 20%. Now I want to be at 70% for the day. So that means I need 50% of bar weight. Again, go back to the 200 pounds. The 200 pounds, multiply that by 50%. Now I have 100 pounds on the bar. So to get my 70%, I'm going to have 100 pounds on the bar. I'm going to have 40 pounds of chain weight. That's going to be, the total there is going to be 70%. All right, looking at dynamic effort training, some of the variables really start to matter here because we're looking for specific outcomes. So this does start to get a little bit more complicated, but it doesn't have to be. Don't overthink it, all right? So the late Louis Simmons, kind of the pioneer of dynamic effort training in the U.S., recommended 75 to 85% at the top of the lift. Now this was the general recommendation. This isn't getting into their heavy phases like their what they titled speed strength, or later on Circumax kind of was always done on dynamic effort day, even though it's kind of debated whether that's actually dynamic effort work or not. But this is talking about their normal cycles that they would go through for dynamic effort training, which they generally refer to as strength speed cycles. And when it came to chains, the late Louis Simmons, his general recommendation was to have 75 to 85% at the top of the lift with about 25% accommodating resistance. So that would be done exactly the way that I just explained previously when it comes to percent training. He was looking at 75 to 85% at the top with about 25% chain weight. So if you have 25% chains, then your bar weight to get 75% would be 50%. When you get to the second week at 80%, again, your chain percentage stays the same most of the time. That means your bar percentage, when you do the top percent minus the chain percent, your bar percentage is actually going to be 55%. Okay, and then 85% on week 3. Again, top percent is 85 minus your 25% chain weight, because the chains stay the same, is going to give you 60% bar weight for that week. Now, that was Louis' recommendation. He said it countless times on videos and articles that he wrote. For me, I think that that's a little bit too slow bar speed. I like to go lighter than that, but I utilize the same principle. Percent at the top minus my chain percent is going to equal the percentage that I'm going to use of bar weight. Okay. Now, Dave Tate tried to make things a little bit simpler, and he put out, I believe it was in a few different articles, where he looked at all the different maxes and said, I'm going to use my cheat sheet here, but if you squat between 200 and 400 pounds, and I imagine the same recommendation would be made for bench press, but he did it in an article about squatting, that you would use 60 pounds of chain. Okay. If you squatted between 400 and 500 pounds if your squat was between 400 and 500 pounds, you would use 80 pounds of chain. And he continues, 500 to 600 pound squatter would use 100 pounds of chain. A 700 to 800 pound squatter would use 120 pounds of chain. And an 8 to 900 pound squatter would use 160 pounds of chain. Again, that's staying within or close to a percentage that would keep you utilizing a fast bar weight. And he had the percentage for the bar weight to go along with that. But I ran the numbers real quick. And most of these numbers, going by those recommendations came out, no matter which level you were at, they generally came out between 15 and 20% of chain weight. Okay, so to use one of those examples, if you were a 400-pound squatter and you were utilizing 80 pounds of chain, that would be 20% chain weight. But if you were a 500-pound squatter using 80 pounds of chain, that'd be 16%. Okay, so at that point, you're kind of like, maybe I should move up to the next level. If you moved up to 100 pounds of chain, that would be back to 20%. So you can kind of see the point that I'm making there. But that was just a way of simplifying it. I think the biggest thing is that I like to vary my chains, even though I fall in maybe fall in a specific one of those brackets, depending upon my goals. If I need to be faster, or I need to improve my rate of force development more, then I'm going to utilize more chain weight and less bar weight. If I'm good on my speed and on my rate of force development at any given time, then I'm going to utilize less chain weight and more bar weight. Okay, so that's kind of how you're looking at it with dynamic effort training. Remember, the key is you have to have good speed. If you're grinding weights out, it's not dynamic effort training, and you need to change one of your variables, whether it be the bar weight or the chain weight, but something needs to change. So that's all I have for it. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to leave a comment down in the comments. Ask any questions you got, and I'll try to give you the best answer I can. But until next time, remember to always be in the pursuit of strength.